Today for Infosec DC. My name is Gene Gadamer, and I'm hosting, and I will be talking today to Ron Gresham, the Governance, Risk, and Compliance Manager at Steampunk, and I'll go ahead and let him introduce himself.
Awesome. Thank you, Gene. Like I said, I am the Governance, Risk, and Compliance Manager for Steampunk. I've been with the company going on 3.5 years now, joined in 2018. And I actually came from being a Fed at DHS CISO to come back to contracting. And at that time, of course, it was SC Solutions. And then we rebranded to Steampunk. So a big change. I've been in this industry for about 14 years now, of course, at different levels. Loved every part of it. It's very challenging, but it's rewarding at the same time. So you may be asking what the Governance Risk Compliance Manager does. I know a lot of us in compliance or in the cybersecurity realm has heard of one or all of those words in some context, and even in the context of the title. This is a new role for Steampunk, which is essentially the person who is responsible for ensuring that any regulation, compliance, or governance, certification, accreditation, anything like that at the organizational level, we continuously meet or we build ourselves up to meet. Of course, we all know there's a lot of requirements, continuous monitoring and review and documentation and auditing and assessments that go along with every single compliance and regulation that is out there. So that's my job now, is to ensure that as we continue to grow, we continue to achieve more accreditation in different realms to make sure that we are still compliant and we're managing those things as we go forward and improving those things so that we make our organization more efficient. And those things are not siloed throughout the organization. So that is essentially what my role is now. Some of you, I'll try to relate it to what maybe at the federal levels. It's more of kind of if you're familiar with the FISMA compliance manager role. They ensure the inventory is updated. They ensure all the systems meet these certain requirements. The scorecard is at a certain level. That's pretty much what it is at the private organizational side of things. So that's essentially what I do.
Okay, well, thank you for that. What I guess the first question is, so if that's what you do, what's missing if you're not around? If you said it's a new role to Steampunk, like what was happening before, or what was the role intended to solve, or what happens when you go on vacation and you're not here to do it, and picking it up, right? What's the ramification of not having that role?
That great question. And before we were managing it just fine, but we grow, we expand, and like I said, we're going after more things. So the role requires more dedication as far as people, somebody fully engaged with this role. Before, it was a split task amongst different individuals in the organization, which worked perfectly. I mean, we're grown, we're successful as we are now, but that becomes more taxing on those individuals because this role becomes more grandiose and bigger and requires more of people's times. So finding a split time of an individual becomes more difficult. So that's when we transition to, no, we actually need a person dedicated to this role. So, what happens when I'm not here at this point in time? There could be a stopgap and moving forward. There could be a situation where, for some reason, if the role goes away and we have assessments coming up and nobody's dedicated to that role, we could lose a certification. We could be on the naughty list, so to speak. And that could cost us business. That could cost us the ability to go after certain contracts and maintain a certain level of goodwill with our clients and customers. So that's a huge thing. We need certain certifications to go after certain types of business and to maintain that business. So now that it's a dedicated role focusing on growing this realm of it, then if it's not here, we're not, or the policies and procedures are not in place to be followed, then it has a business impact and potentially has a goodwill impact with our clients and customers.
So what do you think? Is there like a tipping point, you think, for other organizations that might be thinking, hey, maybe we should have a role like this? Was it a certain size, a certain amount of proposals we're going after, or type of work we're going after, or a number of agencies we're working with, or people involved? What do you think kind of the guideline is for, hey, maybe you ought to have one of these in your own organization?
I think it's a combination of things. It's size, it's the resources that you have available at the time. It's the type of regulation that you're going after. So, for example, ISO and CMMI are more organizational policy process focused at the higher level. What things do we have in place for onboarding, or what things do we have in place for reviewing an employee that has been terminated, and how can we repeat that process? When you start getting to what do we have in place for all of our passwords, and how are our devices hardened, and how does that policy meet it, and when you have to do an assessment against all of those pieces of criteria, that's where organization needs to probably take a step back and say, you know what, we may need a person dedicated to this. And it's very difficult. It's been very, it's difficult at Steampunk. We've had conversations about it, but it's difficult for every organization because you don't see that immediate benefit. This is an overhead cost that an organization may have to float, but the long-term goal of this is going to be tenfold. Being able to bid and maintain contracts, that will be, that would be the bread and butter of it all. You'll see that benefit at the end of the day. But going back to the question, organizations need to just understand at what level where a resource can no longer be split time or can no longer be dedicated to just this, and we need to create a role and have something behind this, have some meat.
Okay, cool. Ari, you have a question?
Yes, yes. I just further understood that your role is a compliance on the IT part of the company. How you relate with the other compliance under the umbrella of governance of the company? Because this is a more organic thing, especially because if you're dealing with contracts, this is not necessarily a problem of IT, but it's a problem of the legal department. So how you have a meeting, how you zero in your policies and your ideas in your company?
So it's collaboration. It's trying to get the different areas of the organization on the same page, working together. My role, while independent of say the IT operations or director or anything like that, I still work for them and I still work with them. So based on what I may want to implement because of a compliance requirement, I need to ensure that it gels with operations. It gels with the direction of the company. It makes sense. So we're always talking, we're having those conversations. Me and the IT director at Steampunk collaborate fully on this. I'm not just handing down compliance requirements. I'm not just saying, make sure all the passwords are 15 characters long. We are continuously having conversations of what makes sense for the organization and the current business practice that we have today. With regards to the regulations, we still have to meet the things on the books, but what makes sense for us? So it's collaboration. It's not siloed at this level. It's all collaboration, and then taking into account our site teams, our project teams. What are they doing? How can we make their jobs easier? When they onboard a new contract, what happens in that IT realm, in that compliance realm? That affects everything in the organization.
Just a small follow-up on this idea. There is the proposal that to make mandatory the report of breaches and problems in the system. How the company, from the perspective of your company, to comply with this regulation, how you feel comfortable? Because I know that there's some companies that they do not want to say, "Oh, we had our system breach because there's a problem in the market." But at the same way, it's interesting to know when you have a breach, because it's something that you can protect other. So from your perspective, what would be the dream of a legislation, of a regulation, whatever, to have the way that you can comply, informing that you had a breach, but without exposing the company if you have no liable situation?
So I've always been a fan of, do the right things right. Document your process, because nobody should expect, and nobody does in this realm, that compliance security is going to be 100% rock solid the minute it's engaged and implemented. So things will happen, but what you do with those things, what you do with those incidents when they happen, speaks a lot about how you're handling your IT and your compliance internally. So when something does happen, first thing is identify it. remediate it, write it down, lessons learned. How can we stop this from happening again? If we do those things, then, reporting out on it and stating that, for example, Steampunk had a breach of some sort, or any organization. If we're saying this is how we handled it, we've documented it, it's in place, we have a process to review it, it is available to the necessary stakeholders, that's the best that anybody can ask. What the problem is, what happens with organizations, they have a breach and they've done nothing. They haven't documented it. They haven't done the lessons learned. They haven't done the due diligence of trying to figure out what the problem was and coming back and saying, okay, how can we stop this? They had a breach. They try to put it under the rug, and then they got found out, or something along those lines. Doing the best you can, document it, accepting that this has happened. What can we do going forward?
Great. So there's a question here from Chanasa. She says, this is very helpful. I'm an IT risk and compliance analyst. We are having trouble getting our DevOps team to remediate findings from our previous year's audit. Do you have any tips on how to work with dev teams who have competing priorities?
That is always the biggest thing, and it's slowly changing in our industry where, DevOps and security are coming together slowly but surely, but it is a culture thing. It is a situation where they think security is going to be a blocker. I think the best way to do that is for security professionals. I think we sometimes get bottlenecked in the documentation and process piece of it, instead of really not necessarily fully understanding, because that's not our job, but to understand what the technology aspect, what the configuration aspect of it is, so that we can properly, we're on board with the DevOps team. We know that they have competing priorities, but we're actually providing valuable recommendations based around this particular issue. So because we've done our research on our side, instead of just passing the buck to say, hey, we have a vulnerability in a patch that needs to be done, restart the server, collaborating with them more and saying, okay, I know we have to restart the server on this day, but this is the reason why we need to patch this now, because it affects these things. And this is very easy for security to do because it's a research aspect of it. That's a big proponent of what I've always preached to my teams is, research. Do your best to understand what the issue is, so that you're not just passing a vulnerability scan to a DevOps or engineer and telling them to fix it. Provide a little bit of meat for them. And I think it helps to ensure them that you're on their side. You know what the struggle is. You know what the issues are, and you understand it to a certain extent. And it's not just, hey, fix this. So I think working with them a little more closely on, okay, what needs to be done first? What can we do that will take care of this? What 3 items can we remediate today that limit the risk on the following 3 items? So I think it's just working closely, and for us on the security and compliance side, understanding a little bit more of what that technological or configuration issue is, instead of just saying, oh, I found a high vulnerability, fix it. I think that does help.
So, I mean, that for someone that's worked in federal consulting and DevOps for quite a while now, it's kind of refreshing to hear somebody on the compliance side kind of using common sense and talking about, hey, we're not going to be perfect, instead of, what you just said, like throwing it over the wall and saying, here, there's a finding, you got to fix it. It's not our job. Do you see yourself, or do you see kind of the optimal role for you being an advisor and working with those teams, at least in relation to the teams, right? The audits might be a little bit different, dealing with the compliance managers elsewhere, or the feds, or that might be different. But is that really, you think, the sweet spot for this role is advisor, or at least for the team to be an advisor?
I think advisor and maybe confidant, saying, being that springboard for the operations team to say, we really don't get why we need to do this, or we don't understand this piece of it. Okay, I hear that. Let me see what I can do from my end to either find a different solution or paint the picture a little bit better, so that we're both on the same page, because I don't want to say, well, so it's a requirement, so we have to do it. And I do think, and everybody is not, tech savvy, especially on the compliance side, and that is fine. But I think having that slight edge and being, like you said, that advisor for them, it does give that, I think it gives that assurance that, okay, they're not just sending me anything. They know the issues. They understand a little bit what Docker is, and they understand what Kubernetes is. The AWS environment. We might not be 100%, but we get it, and that helps. That definitely helps, because then I can take some information back, and once I get feedback and say, okay, let's see what we can do here with these compliance regulations. What works, and what doesn't. How can I combine all the auditing requirements into, instead of six things, what meets the mustard in three things? So yeah, it definitely helps. And being that person that they feel, okay, what we're doing on this side.
What do you feel like? You said you came from the Fed side and you've been doing compliance for a long time. For the way you see this role now, for either for you or for your team, what do you see as kind of the optimal background? Do you see it coming through security? Do you see it coming through dev? Do you see a mix of different roles getting into compliance?
I definitely see a mix of different roles. So I initially actually started out as, I would say, system support help desk. Luckily, that role had some information assurance in it. So I would do a site survey to ensure this area was significant enough to handle our classified network. But then I would also go to a computer and reconfigure their digital signature app and make sure that's working and troubleshoot that. I think that is ideal to have some of that in your back pocket as a compliance and governance risk person. Then also from that transition, I moved over to all compliance, at the very top of DHS, dealing with the components that says, doing customer outreach to say, these are the compliance items for DHS 4300. What is going on? What are we doing? What kind of training do we need? Are we not familiar with what Exacta does and things like that? So having that piece of it and understanding the struggles about every agency, because every agency is different. Everybody's not going to have that, but I think the main piece of it is having a slight edge for technical and slight edge for the compliance, documentation, governance piece of it is a perfect combination, because you understand how to maneuver through both. And it doesn't push you back from the team. Like you said, you can kind of speak the language a little bit better, and it helps to translate that to leadership and the executive management side of it.
What would you say is kind of a great day for you? I mean, for me, again, as a dev and a cynical one at that, my idea of most people involved in governance and auditing is like, man, I stopped that team from producing anything today, right? I blocked them with every finding I could come up with, but obviously that's not realistic. What is your kind of a good day? You come away and say, man, that was a really good day for us today.
I would joke and say getting a document finalized and approved. That is a great day. But I think getting everybody on board with some of the upcoming requirements or what we have to do. For example, recent incidents or anything like that, creating a draft report that has all the things that make the dev and operations side of the house comfortable that we're capturing, all the items we need to in our report. So we can store it, we can archive it. So if any auditor comes in and says, okay, you had this, you didn't do any due diligence on it, they can't say that. We have it on the books. And I didn't just create it and made the operations team fill it out. We both collaborated and said, and now they're okay with saying, okay, this makes sense. I get why I'm putting this information in here. That's a great day when I can do that, because I have to meet a document requirement, or I have to meet a process and a policy requirement. But being able to have that buy-in with operations or development or developers, that's a great day to say I can stamp a book on a report or a process and everybody's in agreement.
Cool. Carl?
Yeah, hey, Carl Kinney from Phalanx here. Ron, just curious, you mentioned, working alongside ops and dev, but what about your relationship with CISOs, security staff, ISSMs? Like, what's your relationship with them on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
So at this particular role right now, it's not as expansive to say we have those different roles. I can give you an example of what I think it will look like in the future. So the CISO role, I'll take it back. The GRC manager role is ideally a step down from the CISO role. So the CISO says, okay, we have to meet these, regulations. GRC manager, go get them. Make sure, manage the projects, make sure we're getting all the things on paper. And then the CISO reports direct to the CTO. and then they all work together with a bit of independence. But that's ideally how that transition looks on the private side. On the governance side, it's still more. I mean, I'm sorry. On the government side, it's still that collaboration. It's still making sure that, as the best we can, because we have our blockers with contractors and feds and things like that. And ideally, we have a fed that is, sympathetic with our work that we do and is willing to collaborate. But it's all collaboration, making sure that, isms and maybe a team lead on the contractor side are working together. They have the same mission, they have the same goal, because their boss is still the CISO, or their boss is still the compliance manager, and the compliance manager's boss is the CISO. So ensuring that the mission is still the same across the board, collaborating, that's the biggest piece. It's collaboration and communication at any level. But with respects to my current role, as the organization grows, I would work directly with the CISO, and we would work directly with the CTO.
Awesome. As a follow-on question, so I have a background in federal cyber risk, DoD, and security. CMMC compliance, where is it on your radar, and what are your key pain points with it if you're actively, working with that?
So that is pretty much my number one priority right now. Essentially, the GRC role was created because now we're going after that. There was I'll tell you kind of me going into it, because every regulation, every compliance requirement is not the same, although they have some underlying, effects with each other. There was a lot of research in CMMC and figuring out what means what. There's not a lot of clear information out there. You may see things like all DoD contractors must have CMMC. You don't talk about the line ahead of that in DFARS that says if you're usually in the supply chain or in the manufacturing chain, you need to have CMMC, and especially if you handle CUI. So the pain point there is, I think there's a lack of clarity in some of these items from both sides of the house, from the CMC AV board to some of the government contracts that are rewriting contracts to include this language. So I think that's going to come closer together as right now the administration is looking at the CMC program as a whole. So that's going to, I think, remediate itself. There's going to be clearer information and clearer direction out there. Other than that, it's definitely on the radar. We have a full schedule built out to meet that. Biggest pain point is for organizations like ourselves, where we do a lot of things on the government side and not necessarily in-house where we handle things. Determining what your boundary is going to be a big pain point, and it's going to paint the direction of where you need to go. Determining where information like CUI will flow through your boundary, and if it's flowing everywhere, how can you minimize that and pull it down into a smaller boundary that you can easier control? Because as we know, the bigger things and the bigger the scope, the more areas of concern and the more areas of risk that we have. So having an area where, okay, we can actually say these 5 people and these 5 systems are the only systems in the organization, because they're segmented off, that are going to manage CUI. This is our CMMC. This is what we're going to accredit for CMMC. That's probably the biggest part that I think is going to face private industries and vendors and things like that, is determining that boundary and saying, where do things lie? Because there are certain requirements that come along with that. And then understanding all the nuance requirements, because you're a DoD contractor doesn't necessarily mean you have to meet CUI or CMMC level 3 or CMMC level 4 or 5, because you don't have to manage against export controls or ITAR. So understanding that it's not clean cut. But yeah, hope that answers your question.
No, great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So, Ron, what do you think other teams can do to help you? Like, what would you like to see, kind of a DevOps team or an organization that's going to work with you and that knows they're going to come up against compliance stuff? How would you like to see them prepare, or what would you like to see them? How would you like to see them engage? And what's the best role to make your job easier, to make everyone's lives easier?
Yeah, it's difficult because the mission is different. It goes back to that. Let's collaborate. Let's get on the same page. but that's easier said than done in a lot of cases. And the DevOps teams, and they actually have, you know, projects to go after and stand up and manage, and they have stricter deadlines than I may have. So I think understanding that I know, or that a compliance person at in this role knows that we have, you know, not conflict of interest, but conflict of priority. And let's figure out the best way to work around it, because the last thing I want to do is make your job harder. My key role is to ensure that operations maintains and is efficient as we're doing business today. Hopefully we can do the same type of business tomorrow, but now we're just stronger security-wise and stronger compliance-wise. So just understand that I know that, you know, I know that side of things, and I will do my best to come across with that in mind. You know, that empathy, so to speak, that compliance empathy, because it is difficult. It is difficult to kind of, especially have a new regulation or requirement come up that we have to meet in 6 months, and now we almost have to change the way we do business. It is difficult. So I'm empathetic and hoping that, with that said, the teams, you know, we work together, which we have. It's been great. So I can't speak for all the other organizations, but at Steampunk, I have no issues. So hopefully I've done my job on that part to where everybody else on the other side is aware of that.
Cool. Anybody else have any questions for Ron?
This is awesome. That's some great questions.
All right. Well, I think we're nearing the end of the time here. Anything else you want to say to wrap up, Ron?
Not really. I think we covered a lot, man. And just to say that, you know, I know we hear, especially on our project teams and, you know, some of the government folks and some of the, not knocking anything, but I've been around the block for a while. We're always going to hear that compliance is a box. Check the box. But I always approach it as, if we do everything that we're supposed to do up front, the box is going to check itself, and we don't even have to worry about it. We got to do it up front, though. And the faster we get ahead of it, it's going to make everybody's lives easier. One thing I've done, and I'm not sure how many people will be aware of that, but I've noticed that ISOs in a compliance shop, a lot of times they manage a system that they've never even seen before. You know, they've never seen the portal or the homepage or, you know, the back-end configuration. Harp on ISOs getting access, read-only access, you know, getting in those sprints with dev teams so that they see exactly what they're doing, gives them a better understanding. I'm a hands-on visual learner, so if I can see it, let me take it back and better help you with this implementation, you know. So start, you know, pushing that gap between what ISOs are doing and what the security engineers and the DevSecOps guys are doing, and you know, start closing that gap even more, and that compliance piece will work itself out. It'll be easy.
It's great. It's actually great to hear. Like I said, I have been a dev in the federal space for a long time. I am also exceptionally cynical about all of it, but it's funny to see that so many times we've gone in to do DevOps and DevSecOps transformations, and the reason we're told we can't get there is because of compliance, right? There's too many reasons we can't do it. On the other hand, what you just described sounds like, you know, compliance being part of DevSecOps is the right way for the compliance to go forward, not just for the DevSecOps. You know, they should go hand in hand much better, not be at odds. So that was great.
Absolutely.
So,
and like I said, I see that changing, and it's gonna improve. It's gonna be great.
Good. Well, Ron, thank you very much, and thanks for all the questions from everyone that attended. I really appreciate it. If anybody has any other ideas for talks, people who would like to speak, if you have people you work with, or if you'd like to speak, please feel free to contact me. And again, thanks a lot to Ron for giving up his lunch to talk to us today. Thanks,
Absolutely. Everyone. I really appreciate you guys having me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the event today. And was fantastic. Yes, we should be cynical, but we should be.
Yeah. Don't lose that piece of it.
Exactly.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.